everyone. So happy to be here. My name is Kate, and today we're going to be talking about designing healthcare technology. So a little bit about me. I'm a research assistant at OHSU, and I work on a program called the ICANN program. ICANN has two aims. Our first aim is to teach student nurses about social determinants of health. And by social determinants of health, I mean social factors like food security, housing security that impact people's health. The second aim of the program is to intervene in people's lives and to see if this intervention changes their lives. So we're both providing a service, and then we're seeing if this service is working. It's very important. So we're doing research and providing service. Healthcare sort of recently is starting to incorporate social determinants of health more and more and understand that health is about far more than like biomedical health. It's about food, it's about housing, it's about social isolation. So there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm right now for bringing these two sectors together that for a long time have been a little separate. So what does this look like in practice, and where does technology come in? So a few years ago, this happened in our program. A couple of students were going to visit a client, let's call him John. So students are in this rotation for about 12 weeks, and then they move on to their next rotation. The program involves home visits, so people visit clients in their homes. So the students went to visit John on their first day. John lives actually about a 10-minute walk from here in state-subsidized housing in an SRO, a single resident occupancy unit. And John has diabetes, he has limited access to food, he has limited income, and he can't work because of complications related to his diabetes. So the students go to meet John the first day, they walk into his apartment building, they're with their faculty instructor, they're a nursing professor who accompanies them on the first day. And they walk in and they go up to John's door, and John's standing outside. They're surprised to stand outside. They're fine. Everyone introduces themselves. Everything's going great. John's happy to meet the students. They're happy to meet him. And then they notice that John has an umbrella in his hand. They don't know why. So after they've introduced each other, they're about to go inside the apartment, and John says, "Okay, everyone stand back." So the professor and the two students stand back, and John opens his umbrella, and cockroaches fly out. And the students are real pros. They don't really react, and they say, "Okay, great. We should talk about housing." And so John says, "Yeah, we really need to talk about my housing." So the students go into John's apartment, they sit down, and they get to work. To do this work, the students have one very important piece of technology. They have a laptop, and on that laptop, they have an electronic health record. And so today, I would like to talk about designing that software application to help John and to use in John's home. So just to set the stage a little bit for this project, first of all, you have the non-PMPM. That's me. I have a master's in public health. I have a lot of experience in qualitative research, health disparities, social determinants of health. What I have zero experience in is product management, none at all. But that's how this project happened. The next person worth knowing is the development team, and I say person because it is one person. And so that's kind of the core of the team, the non-PMPM and the developer. Next, we have the users. So the users are nursing professors and students at OHSU. And I'm being a little glib in my title. They do not hate technology, not at all. They just don't care about technology. They really don't. They want it to work. They're doing a really important job, and they want it to function. They don't really want to talk about aesthetics with me. They just want it to work. And lastly, we have the environment that all this is happening in. So for the first 3 years of this program, we were using JavaScript-embedded PDFs accessed through a VPN. Sometimes on tablets, sometimes on laptops. And yes, that was as complicated and difficult to use and manage and analyze as it sounds. It was really difficult. So because of that, we decided to switch over to an electronic health record. It's worth noting this project, like unfortunately a lot of projects in social services and health services had super limited resources. For example, there was no interactivity on the page. I was allowed no skip logic, anything like that. So basically every time anyone would see the page, it looked exactly the same. It's also worth noting that this was always accessed via a VPN because it's storing protected health information, which is totally standard. What's important there is that it slows it down. It makes the technology more frustrating to work with. So what's the challenge here? You may already be detecting some possible challenges to this project. But the big challenge, the first thing I want to talk about is how difficult it is to design for both research and service. So remember, ICANN is a project where we are both delivering an intervention and testing its effectiveness. Those things are similar, but they're distinct. They're different things, and they require different technology. So everyone's been to some sort of health provider, and the health provider is sitting there typing away on their laptop, and you're sitting there and you're vulnerable, and you're telling them all of this, and that experience isn't great. And we really wanted to avoid that as much as possible. So what exact challenges did we face, and how did we overcome those? So first of all, research really likes validated items spoken verbatim. And this means questions that have been tested and questions that you know are asking exactly what you think they're asking. They're also supposed to be read the exact same way every time. Service doesn't care about any of that. Service wants eye contact. Service wants you to follow the natural flow of a conversation. For example, food insecurity is something that we ask about. You have a lot of different items you can choose from for this. And so what we did was choose the shortest, most colloquial form of each question possible. Also, research questions are always rated on their health literacy, and we would always choose the lowest health literacy possible, not because of literacy per se, but because we wanted people to feel like they were talking to a human, not a data collection machine. So that really helped to choose those types of questions. So how else is this difficult? So research wants drop-downs with categorical data. That is all it wants. And service doesn't care about that. Service wants open-ended responses. We're talking to people about their entire lives. These are people with really complex lives and situations. They have a lot to say, a lot to tell that their providers need to understand to provide care. So for example, we ask people, are you employed? If you ask someone if they're employed, you'll almost never get a yes or a no. You will get a long story, and it will involve a yes or a no, and how they got to where they are, and that's great. And you need that as their provider to help them, help them in their life in whatever way they choose. And so you need that context. The developer and I made a big mistake. We kind of forgot about this. We put in far too few open-ended responses, and when people were initially testing the software, they were saying, people are telling me these things, and I have nowhere to write all of this down, and it's so rich. So as we went on, we had to learn to let go of fields. We had to learn that not everything needed to be aggregated, actually. Some things could be these big, long, loose, open-ended responses that we'll probably never analyze on the research side, but are key to service. So the final challenge that I'd like to talk about with regards to this division between research and service is volume. So research is data hungry. Research wants you to ask a lot of questions, because if you have a lot of questions and a lot of data, then that helps you understand your program, and that can help you understand if it's working and how it's working if it is working. Service wants you to be cool about it. Service doesn't want you to sit down and make people ask a 3-hour-long questionnaire, and these absolutely exist in research. And service just, it's not going to work. People aren't excited about doing that. So what could be done about this? Well, we wanted as little clutter as possible, but that was difficult because we couldn't have any interactivity in the page. So we basically reduced what we were asking as much as we possibly could. So just for an example, this is what a typical electronic health record looks like. As all of you can see, it's a lot. It's a lot to look at. While you're looking at this, you're trying to use it, and you're trying to talk to a human and have a conversation, it's pretty difficult to do. And so our solutions were to trim as much as we could. We thought so carefully about how our forms were nested, and we eliminated some questions that weren't relevant. So with regards to social determinants of health, something that's really important for a lot of people is to discuss criminal justice history. But for our particular clients, that's not something they often want to work on. So we just took that whole suite of items out of the program, and we had to let go of some things because that enabled our users, the students and the nursing professors, to do their job better for service. And sorry, I can't show you ours that we ended up developing because I'm not supposed to, but it's kind of like this. Imagine about 80% less, and it's purple and gray. So that's sort of what it looks like. That's the best I can do. So we've talked a lot about this tension between research and practice, but what about the tension between healthcare research and software development? Because we ran into a little bit there as well. So we had a bit of miscommunication about how data is used for research. So a part of our program that I love is that it's based on client goals. Clients enter the program, they establish goals, and that guides the entire intervention, and this is awesome. So whenever we were talking about that, I expected this to go into a normal relational data table, a primary key, a foreign key, so I could extract all of that later. And instead, I got 2 extra columns with pipe-separated values. And that's been really hard to work with for pretty obvious reasons. And I think somewhere in the process of designing, how this would look, I forgot to think about the other side and how it was all going to come out. And that's been really difficult to work with that and really difficult to train people on that too. So I think that was just miscommunication from the healthcare research to the development side. So where else did we have tension? There was a bit of an issue about a save button. So the programmer did a cool thing, and when you tab out of a field, it saves it. There's no save button, it just saves. That's neat, but unfortunately for our users, it wasn't what they expected. They're used to a save button. Basically, the developer didn't understand where healthcare technology is and how people act when they're using technology and what they expect. And so when we were testing this software, one of the first things users came to me and said is, where's the save button? They had a lot of anxiety about this. And unfortunately, when I went back to the developer with this, I was told it was user error. Okay, so that was too bad, and because it was pretty clear what users wanted and what users expected, and unfortunately, we kind of got stuck on this point, and it would have been really great to hear some creative solutions. And it's this interesting example, I think, of tech getting a little ahead of itself, because he had this very clear idea of what was good and best, and it was just different than what our users wanted. It wasn't good and best to them. So that was sort of an interesting clash we had. So next, where else did we have tension? So the last bit of tension I'd like to talk about is this sort of strange dynamic that happened over time, and this feeling from my side, and I think a lot of this had to do with being a non-PM PM. I don't know how to write software for electronic health records, and that's how it goes. The developer knows how to do that, and I was doing what I was doing. But somehow throughout the process, there sort of emerged this power differential. And eventually what happened was I started feeling like I was asking for favors as the development process went on. Up front, we were very clear that we wanted this program to go through lots of iterations. I knew that we needed tons of testing, and we wrote that into our contract. That was very clear. But somehow it turned into this thing where everything that users would want, I would go to the developer, and it felt like a big ask. And that was too bad, because then eventually, as I think, and a lot of that was being a non-PM PM, that started to deter me from asking for what I knew we needed. And I think at the end of the day, I know that there are going to be asymmetries in power and knowledge. That's just going to happen, but it kind of felt like the developer really dug into that instead of backing away from it. And that didn't benefit either of us, I don't think, and it really didn't benefit the product. And that's what I really, really cared about. And I think the product, eventually we got it to where we wanted it to be, but I think it could have happened faster, or maybe even could have been better if that power differential hadn't emerged the way that it had. So what's the big takeaway here? So the big takeaway is that designing tech to help John and John's umbrella and John's situation, and measuring if you're helping John, is hard. It's really hard to do those two things at the same time. And healthcare systems and social service systems are trying to do this all over the world every day. Even if it's not a research project like ours was, these systems are still interested in if interventions are working, if people's health is improving, if they're getting what they want. And it's really difficult to find that balance. So how do you get the best of both worlds? Like, what is the ideal here? And I think it's out there. It is. But it requires projects that are well-funded, that have institutional support for good functionality, good user experience. And it requires talented people making them who understand this idea of rapport and human connection and research and science. Because you really have both things side by side, and they have to work together. And it's delicate and it's difficult, but It's so important. And we didn't solve all of these problems. Notice I didn't talk about solutions for everything because we didn't solve all of these things. We had a lot of constraints we were working up against. I mean, we had such little money and time. But it was a huge improvement on what we had. We no longer use those PDFs that gave me nightmares. We don't use those anymore. And so we didn't solve everything, but now we're able to do research better and we're able to provide better service. So we made huge gains and I'm so proud of that and I'm so happy to have been a part of that. But it could be so much better. It really could be. And it's so important that this technology is because so many people are interacting with providers every day and are vulnerable and need a lot of help. And the technology that providers are interacting with, it matters. It matters that they're not frustrated, and it matters that they can use it. It's so important that this tech that is strong and is usable. So with that, thank you so much for listening, everyone. Yeah, have a nice night.